Welcome back to the Fundraising Beyond Borders podcast. I'm Morgan Gross, and here today with Ed Harris, owner of Blue Hills Digital, who helps nonprofits navigate the digital world and help create websites that actually work. Ed, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation, Morgan. Glad to be here.
Of course. Ed, where are you tuning in from? Where are you tuning in from in the world today?
So I am based in Portland, Oregon, in the United States. Currently, I'm in Vermont, though, so on the East Coast rather than the West Coast.
Very, very cool.
And I'm originally from the UK, so you might be able to hear the accent. So a little bit of international experience myself.
Yes, I love that. No, and it's so cool having guests from all around the world with all different accents, and it's one of my favorite parts about having guests here. Ed, just out of curiosity, as I was, typing in your name, Blue Hills Digital, is there any meaning behind the Blue Hills thing? Where did Blue Hills come from?
There is not. So the digital part speaks to just like, I'm working to help nonprofit organizations navigate the digital world. It's kind of starting with the website and everything around that. The business previously had a different name this is like more than 10 years ago. And I moved at that time I was living in Massachusetts. I moved to Vermont. I had to reincorporate the business in Vermont when I moved, and the name of the business was already taken. So I needed, and at that time it was a part-time side gig kind of business. It wasn't my full-time work as it is now. And so the business name didn't feel like it mattered that much. I just needed something, and I was looking out of the window. It was kind of sunset, and the hills were all like hazy and blue in the distance. And
I really like that. Thanks for sharing. I was just very curious because it's always so interesting hearing founding stories of names. But Ed, let's kind of dive into today and chat about optimizing nonprofits' websites, and obviously, speaking to an international perspective and international donors. A lot of the clients we serve are, North American nonprofits who have global programs. But again, a lot of listeners that are quite literally from all around the world. Everybody knows how important it is to make sure you have a really good online digital presence. And what it starts with is your website. Your website is what tells it all, what shares about your programs, it builds donor trust. So I'm really excited to dive in and for you to kind of give a lot of tips and tricks on how to best optimize your website and your online digital presence. So it would be really great to hear from you, Ed. How essential is a nonprofit's website in establishing credibility and trust with potential donors and supporters?
Yeah, I mean, I think your website is fundamental to how you communicate with all of the audiences that your nonprofit has. So, one audience is your donors, but then there often are other audiences. There's the folks who use the programs or services that the organization provides. There's potentially press and media. Some organization is also trying to talk to politicians and policymakers. And so for all of those audiences, especially in today's world, that your website may well be the only place that they ever actually interact with your organization and get an impression. And so that's the place where you have to communicate what your organization does and invite people in and educate them about your work and hopefully convert them into donors or email subscribers or program users. And so your website is everything there.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, I heard you say converting to donors or newsletter subscribers or, making sure that you have kind of an end goal with your website. And there might be multiple, right, end goals. But in your experience, what are kind of those key functions a nonprofit website should fulfill to serve its mission effectively? What kind of key areas of a website should they be looking at?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously it's important that your website communicates to anybody that comes to visit what it is that your organization does, and that the tighter and more succinct you can be about that communication of what you do, the better. Your website needs to, so for anybody that comes to your website, even the simplest website where somebody already knows the name of your organization and they've just come to the website, your website needs to do a good job of educating them about what you do and then bringing them into a deeper relationship with your organization. And so that might start with downloading an educational resource or heading over to social media to stay connected, or signing up for an email list is great. Probably you want to eventually convert some of those people into donors. That's often kind of the bottom of the funnel. that you want to lead people, like that's kind of the deeper point in the relationship that you want to bring people to. And so having a clear user journey on your website to educate people about what you do and communicate why that work is so important, and then tell them that you need their support, and then bring them down to that donation point, those are the critical parts of a website. And I think stepping back from that a little bit as well, like if you were limited on resources and that's where you would want to focus your energy first, stepping back from that a little bit, there is a broader marketing function for your website. So if you need to attract the attention of people who maybe haven't heard of your nonprofit, but are interested in a particular issue area, you want to try and catch the attention of that broader audience and introduce them. And so your website, as you kind of think bigger, that might be the next stage of building a website.
No, that's great. And do you have, when it comes to focusing on certain parts of the website, anything that they should prioritize when it comes to, is it storytelling, calls to action, program impact? Like, is there anything, I'm just thinking, going through some clients that I've worked with updating their website, are there certain like call to actions that come to mind that should be on there? Is it buttons? Is it leading them to donate, read more? Like, what are kind of those like main key functions or buttons that should help with the design process?
Yeah, I mean, I think communicating exactly what the work is that you do and why, like that is a critically important piece. If you go to a business website, you don't necessarily have to spend a lot of time, or it serves a different purpose. Like if you are a business that is selling a product, it's very clear what you want people to do. Like you have this product, you think it's great, you want them to buy it, right? But if as a nonprofit organization, it's more complicated than that. You're working in an issue area, you have a program or a service or a thing that your organization does that you believe as an organization is going to create a certain change. But there's a little bit more work that you have to do to explain both what it is that your organization does, what that change is that you're trying to create in the world, and most importantly, like why it is that you think that work you're doing is going to lead to the change. So that people will call it a theory of change. And so laying that out for people and explaining why you think that work is going to create this change, I think that's super important. And I think I often see that getting buried in the About Us section. There's often a page that describes the mission. And it's super important, but I think trying to bring just a short version of that, like right front and center onto the website, is really important. And then from there, the website flows on down into the call to action buttons that you were describing. And that depends a lot on who your audience is and what your strategy is for engaging that audience.
That leads me to thinking too, as you're chatting through it, what are some of the most crucial pages on a nonprofit website? Because, sometimes I go to nonprofits and they have like 30, 40 pages and they want to do every tiny little like explanation is each page. So like, is there a magic number to how many pages a nonprofit should have, or is it dependent on each nonprofit? What do you say with like page layout?
I'm always going to be inclined to say it depends on the nonprofit, because, it depends on the work you're doing and the audiences you're trying to reach. So it really is it's a decision for every organization to make, in the context of their work and their website. I think there are some critically important pages that you want to make sure you cover, or important content areas. So what I was just describing, the mission and the why and the theory of change, I think that's really important. And so that needs to be covered. Describing the work that you do, I think that's important. That needs to be covered. I love to see some names and faces. I think it's hard to build up that kind of trust and credibility when you don't give visitors the opportunity to feel like they're getting to know the staff or, the board members or the people that are actually doing the work. And then you need to have a place where people can convert to do that conversion action. So whether it's signing up for your email newsletter or making a donation. And I think it's important to say as well, those are different chunks of content that you need, but they don't have to be on separate pages. There's lots of reasons why you might choose to have multiple separate pages or design your navigation in certain ways. There's definitely search engine optimization reasons to break things out into separate pages. But if you're just starting up and you don't have the budget for a complicated website, this could just be a single page. It could just be a homepage. It says, here's what we're about, here's what we're doing, here's a place to sign up to learn more through email, and here's our donation form. And that could be where you start.
Great. Yeah. And I think that's good to share, is like, there's always a starting place, right?
Right.
For that. And so I'm thinking now to one of my all-time favorite pages as a fundraiser on a website, which is the donate page. But before we hop into kind of optimizing your donate page, what do you recommend about the donate button? Because I know there's a lot of talk around what should the donate button look like, or where should it be placed on a website. What is kind of your thoughts on a donate button?
I like to have it be prominent, obviously, and I think your fundraiser, your development team is going to agree with that. And so a lot of times there is kind of a typical navigation pattern in the header of a website where you have the logo and you have your 4 or 5 primary navigation items, and then there's a spot up there for a button. And I like, if your organization accepts donations online and wants to drive that as a primary goal on the website, then I think that's a great place to put the button. Whether it says donate now or give today or join us, I think it depends a little bit on the messaging that your fundraising team or development team has decided to put around. Like, are you inviting people to become a member? Are you kind of leaning into that joining us language, or are you comfortable with just like the donate word as a call to action? That's the kind of thing you might want to test or get feedback on from your community. But yeah, I like to see it in the header. I think it should be, like I said, if donations are something that you're really trying to drive across the website at all times, then ideally that button would be highly visible at all times. So whether somebody's reading about a program or digging into a story library, wherever it is, you would want to make sure that button's kind of visible in the header, or maybe repeat it down in the footer. Make sure it's out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, that's where I see, sometimes with nonprofits websites, it gets lost. So we want to make sure it's easy to find, and people know how to easily press that button and get to that donate page. So once they press that button, we're on the donate page. And again, everything's going to look different. It kind of depends on the donation tool that you're using. Sometimes it'll lead straight to a pop-up. But if not, if we have the option to build out a donate page, what are some of those critical elements nonprofits should focus on when designing their donate page?
Yeah, my preference, as much as possible, like you said, it depends on the tool you're using and your website platform. But if you can keep people, just have the donation page be another page on your website, and so people don't have that experience of being kind of bounced out to a donation page that opens in a new tab and looks slightly different, like that's ideal. So I think on that donation page, like, you have the form, right? And you have a clear messaging at the top of the page that doesn't push the form too far down, but reminds people what the impact of their gift is going to be and why it's so important to make a donation. And then your form should have as like few fields as possible, like without losing some of that core functionality. So you want to make sure that you're collecting enough information about the person who's making the donation that you're able to fill out a profile in your donor database. So you need their name, their email address. If you have a texting program, you might want to get their phone number. And then you need their payment information. So that's kind of another non-optional thing. And if you can accept Apple Pay, Google Pay, and all of the other convenient ways of giving, but present all of that in a streamlined way, then that's great. A lot of organizations will want to give people the choice to make a donation in honor of somebody or as a tribute gift. And so that's a nice to have. And if you can set up your form in a way that you don't see all of the fields for that, unless somebody has, so those fields are only displayed if somebody checks the box and says, yes, I want to add that additional information. So trying to hide as much of the form content as you can, unless it's going to be relevant to the person that's filling it out.
Right.
Yeah, so that's important stuff on the form itself. Well, elsewhere on the page, I think it's great to have some frequently asked questions just kind of answered right there for you. So it's great to have your organization's tax ID number is a good one to have. Like, that's often something that people need. If you have contact information of your development team. If people have questions, let's make that really obvious. And I think another thing that's helpful to have on that page is information or links to other ways of giving. So if people aren't interested in making like a one-time or a recurring gift, I'm assuming that's what's available on the form. If they want to make a gift of stocks, or if they want to get information about legacy giving or something like that, then have those links or some kind of mention of that elsewhere on the page. One more thing, if you have gone through the process of verifying, like credentialing your organization with GuideStar or one of the other, like Charity Navigator or one of those other organizations that kind of gives you the little seal of approval afterwards, the donation page is a great place to make sure that those kind of those symbols of trustworthiness show up. So I always try and get those on the donation page as well.
Awesome. I want to go back to that real quick because especially for international nonprofits, I think it's so big, right? We have to work a little bit harder to build that donor trust and that credibility. So any social proof that you have, so when it comes to like what you're saying, like any awards or anything, like if you're registered with GuideStar or any international kind of social proof showing that, you are a legit nonprofit at the end of the day and people are trusting you and that they others are donating to you. I think that's really good. So I think that's really key for international donors. And then also one thing that you were saying too is I oftentimes see with international nonprofits is that they're registered in multiple countries. So sometimes, one donation form doesn't do it all. So it might be maybe you're American. For Americans, they can check out with your form. But it's also really important to show if you're registered in South Africa, then you want to have a specific South African donate button, then, having that there, or the UK, if you're registered to get gift aid, whatever it might be. So I think it's also important to like clearly label if you're an American, donor, check out here or donate here or, whatever it is. If you're UK, wherever you are in the world. I don't know if you have any tips on that, but I think it's also really important to be very clear to a donor labeling where a specific type of donor, dependent on their country, can check out if it's different from a regular donation form.
Yeah, and that's a great question to when you're selecting the technology, the vendor partner that you're going to use for your donation form, like having that conversation with them about how that's going to display differently in different geographies, because there are certainly plenty of US focused giving platforms that are really just kind of focused on the US and aren't aware of, like you mentioned gift aid in the UK or like all of these other, and I'm sure that there are 100 other countries that have different unique requirements. And so talking with that giving platform about making sure that they're aware of that. And I don't know whether they, like some of them will display a different form, or you might need to build a separate campaign for different countries that display based on the visitor's IP address, that kind of thing. But yeah, making sure that it always comes back to understanding the needs of your audience. And so if you have a donor audience in different countries that need to give certain information or receive certain information after they make a donation that is specific to that country, you have to meet them. You have to give them what they need.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's so important, Ed. That's a really good thing to bring up, is making sure when you're interviewing or talking through and trying to figure out what's your best, online donation tool or CRM or both, whatever it might be, that it can really adapt to whatever audience you're serving, whatever donors you're serving. One of my favorite tools is Fundraise Up, because it uses AI. So it shows up based off of your location. So, me being here in Zambia, Kwacha will pull up. But if I'm in America, USD will pull up, and you can toggle that on and off. But there's some really cool tools out there that is, using AI and can help with noticing your location. And sometimes they can process gift aid for you while also accepting American donations. And so that is one tool that I really love. I don't know if you have any other tools that come to mind, but Fundraise Up has always been one of my favorites.
Yeah, I agree. Fundraise Up is great. I've had a few good experiences like adding that to client websites recently, and it's a breath of fresh air compared to some of the ones that have been around for a while. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, is there anything else too that you wanted to share when it comes to the donate page? Anything that one thing too I also wanted to share is before I forget, was on whatever donation tool you use, I love when they give you the option of like having like a little security check or like a lock check, or showing that like you are checking out with a secure platform. I think that also really builds donor trust. Like I know that when I put in my credit card information, it is a legit source. So that's one thing else.
Yeah, totally. I mean, sometimes it feels like you're just kind of adding a little padlock symbol, but it's amazing what that communicates to users still, especially if you're old enough to have been using the internet when not every website was secure by default. And this is still the case. Sometimes I'll come across websites where the site is not being served by default over, when you, at the beginning of the URL, you want to see HTTPS and the little secure padlock in your browser. Like that tells you that the entire website is being served over a secure protocol. And there's plenty of websites where that is not the case still. And so that's one of many things that you need to optimize when you're getting your website ready for modern fundraising. Just on the donation page as well, the other thing that I wanted to mention is thinking about what happens after the donation is submitted. So you submit that form, and there are a few things that are happening behind the scenes. One is that hopefully you're pushing that data into a database internally. And so you might need to think about your donor CRM integration.
Yep.
And maybe that's something you want to talk about more. The other one is what is the user experience? Well, like, what do they see? So what pops up? Do they get redirected to a confirmation page or a thank you page? What's the content there? And what happens in their inbox? Like, what does that email look like? Yeah. So
yeah. Okay, absolutely. I would definitely want to talk about tech stacks and how amazing technology is these days that can help us really automate so much, because it's hard, especially if you're a smaller to medium-sized nonprofit, keeping up with everything. So automation is key these days. But before that, I just wanted to go back. You sent a newsletter out not too long ago, and if I highly encourage anybody listening to sign up for your newsletter, because it's amazing. Ed gives you give such great tips and tricks that are very that you can just go and do. It's just good reminders to go and implement. They're very tangible next steps. So you put out an email not too long ago about language and accessibility for global nonprofits. So like a little bit around like how can you manage multiple languages on a website, and that comes up a lot. I was actually just at speaking at a conference a couple months ago in Cape Town, and this nonprofit came up to me and she was like, what do I do? We have South Africa, we have the Netherlands, we have the UK, the US, and there might have been one more place. And they're like, there's multiple languages here involved. There's multiple countries involved. Do we have 4 or 5, however many countries are involved websites? Or is there a way to optimize it with multiple languages? Like, what is the solution? So do you have anything, any tips on what to do when it comes to multiple languages, multiple locations?
Yeah. I mean, so the default, I think, often is that you have your original website in whatever the original language is. So for nonprofits here in the US, that's likely to be English. And you simply allow users who are primary speakers of a different language to rely on whatever tools they use. So there are some great browser extensions that just translate. Sometimes Google will offer to translate
right.
A website that it detects is not in your language to a different language. So one solution is simply to rely on the tools that other people, that speakers of a different language, have decided to use in their browser to do the translating for them. If you want to go the step beyond that and actually offer a language, like a language switcher in your website, so you'll see the little flag or the language code or both in a drop down up in the top, up in the header area of a website. There are various different third-party tools that you can use to create that functionality. And it is definitely a more complicated and advanced thing to add to a website, but often, like for the client example that you were just talking about, it often goes a long way if you know that your audience, there's a good chunk of your audience that speaks one other language, or maybe there are several different other languages that you want to try and cater to. It goes a long way to showing those audience members that you care, and that you've taken that extra effort to meet them where they're at. And so in 5 years ago, there was a free Google Translate widget that you still see on some websites, which it doesn't look beautiful, but it kind of did a nice job at that point in time. Unfortunately, that's been discontinued. That's a service that Google decided to end.
Okay.
Which I think isn't. It still works on some websites, and so you still run into it sometimes in the wild, and it says it has like a little Google logo next to it, but they ended that in 2020, unfortunately. They continued it for some, like during the pandemic, they kind of immediately they opened it up again for nonprofits, but only if you were involved in COVID-19 response. And so it kind of lingered for a few years, and I honestly, I don't know what the status of it is now. I would imagine it's certainly not something to rely on at this point in time. And so the next option, there's a great service. I mean, there's lots of great services that you could use for this. There's one called Weglot, and I'm guessing maybe we can put some links to these in the show notes.
Yes, we can. Absolutely.
So Weglot is a good one. There's a free tier plan if you're just translating into one language, and it does kind of a first pass with like machine generated translations just for, I think there's a cap on how many URLs it will translate as well. And so it'll kind of churn out these machine generated translations, and then you can get like a little, English to Spanish switcher to go in the header of your website. And then if you want to add more languages or add more pages or have the ability to go into a dashboard and actually edit the translations, then that bumps you onto a paid tier. But it's a great service. I've implemented that on several websites. So definitely would recommend that. There is another one called Gtranslate, which I think that's another good option. Similar pricing structure. There's kind of a very limited free plan, and then you're onto a monthly subscription if you want to do something more than that. So it can get pricey pretty quickly based on the size of your website and the number of languages, that kind of thing. And one other thing I'll say about that, however you feel about AI and machine generated stuff, the machine generated translations are fine. It's probably better than nothing. But I don't think it's ever a substitute for having a native speaker or somebody who is fluent in the language go in and review the machine generated translation and edit it to make sure that you're actually speaking to those audiences the way that you want to be speaking. I feel very hesitant about relying on machine generated translations, especially for the really important content on your website. Like if you've taken the time to really wordsmith your messaging in English, I think you would want to do the same thing in any of the other languages that you were speaking to your audience in.
I think that's really important. And you talk about, the cost, and it can get expensive. But what I think, though, is like if you have 4 different languages, think about how expensive it would be to build 4 different other websites in different languages and then maintain all those websites and, all of that, and then also confuse donors. And what do you think about that, Ed? I mean, I've heard some people say, because I'm located in the US, UK, wherever else, I have to have different websites for each region. And they all have the same mission. So the mission is the same. They just think they need to change it based off of their location. Do you think still having one main website is okay and then having these translations in place, or what are kind of your thoughts on that?
As much as possible, I would try and steer people towards having as few websites as possible, just because of the technical overhead of maintaining multiple different websites. And when you implement a multilingual website well, so the tools that I mentioned, like Weglot, for example, they help you. Essentially, you have one version of your site, but it will create different, to a search and like a Google indexing bot that crawls your site. If you've implemented Weglot for, English and then 2 other languages, for example, it will see all 3 different versions of that page, one for each language, as it's indexing your site. And so if it detects that there is somebody whose browser language and computer language is set to Spanish, and they Google something related to your organization, the result that shows up will be the Spanish language page rather than the English language page. And so that, I don't think we should spend our time digging into the details of multilingual SEO here, but
sure.
You don't need to kind of recreate your entire website in a different language in order to make sure that your language is visible and findable in that way. If you implement multilingual functionality on your original single website well, then that kind of has the effect of creating that second version of your website in a different language. I think the place where it makes sense to start thinking about a second website is if the content, say you're a US organization, but you are running a program in Morocco, say, and the pages of that website would actually be totally different because the programming is different there than it is in your program in South Africa, for example. Then it might make sense to actually have, a microsite or a site that lives on a subdomain or something like that is specifically for your services in that country.
Okay.
So
I do, and I don't know if you've run into this. I'm thinking about one of my clients right now. So they are fundraising arm in the U.S. So they're 501c3 registered in the U.S., but their primary focus is to fundraise for programming in Tanzania. Then they're also registered in Tanzania. They do the same programming projects in Tanzania that the U.S. is fundraising for. Have you seen that at all? One website, should it be distinguished at all on the website that they're 501c3 registered and they're registered in another country? Have you seen anything like that before?
I mean, I'm not a lawyer, and this isn't legal advice. I'm also not like an expert on the fundraising registrations either. I mean, my inclination there would be to not try to avoid creating a divide between, the donor site in the US and the program-facing site in Tanzania. I think it's often in the footer of a website or on the about pages, you get very clear language about the legal status of the organization. And so I think in that example, you would just want to make sure that both of those, like that all of that information is represented there, that the organization is registered as, whatever the legal name is with the EIN and the mailing address, like here in the US, and that you also include the equivalent information about Tanzania. I would try to avoid creating a separate site unless there was some legal requirement to do so.
Right. Absolutely.
Because I think you also might be missing an opportunity to help the donors be really connected to the programs that they're serving. So
exactly. And quick tip that you just said right there. Everybody go make sure that your EIN is located in the footer with your mailing address and all of that, so people can easily find that EIN number, because that's one of the first things I do going onto a website is scrolling down. And again, credibility, right? It's knowing that you're registered. And again, this is relevant for U.S. nonprofits, but for other nonprofits in a global context, is showing that social proof of your registration is really important. Cool.
Yeah, and making clear to donors what entity they are donating to. So are you donating to an entity in the country where you live or a different country? It has big implications for, tax deductibility of your donation, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. And that's very important. Okay, I want to go back we were talking about a donate page, and then what happens after a donation happens. They go through that process. Hopefully the donation tool, has at least an automatic thank you that pops up, and then minimum an automated thank you that gets sent straight to their inbox. But there is, sometimes tools don't do that, or, what goes after that thank you, an email welcome series. There's so many different automations that can happen. Tell us a little bit more about your favorite tech stacks, as we call it, of technology coming together and doing some pretty awesome things. Tell us about some of your favorite tech stacks.
Yeah, I don't know if there's ever going to be a favorite. Whatever tech stack you choose or try to implement, there are always going to be some frustrations, things that you wish it did that it doesn't do. I think I see the tension a lot between trying to find a tool that does everything. So a tool that can be your donor CRM and your email marketing platform for your newsletters, that kind of thing, and the tool that sends transactional emails like your donation receipts and that kind of thing, and provides your online giving forms, and maybe it does other stuff too, event registrations, peer-to-peer fundraising, SMS campaigns. There's so many things that you might be looking for tools to do, and I think there's a real move in the nonprofit tech world to try. Everyone's kind of rushing to try and be the tool that can do everything for you. And I think in those situations, I often find that, yes, you have everything centralized with one vendor, you might be saving some money, but then you find that each of the individual tools, like the giving tool, the emailing tool, just isn't, the functionality isn't as deep as you would get if you went with the platform that does that specifically. And so I tend to lean more towards the like pick the best tools for the different jobs and then figure out the data flow. And figuring out the data flow is really hard. Like sometimes there is a native integration between one platform and another. Other times you have to use a tool like Zapier to push data around between different tools. So it's challenging. I don't have an easy answer to that. Yeah, I do. I mean, you mentioned FundraiseUp earlier. FundraiseUp has a nice set of integrations that will push donation data into donor CRMs like Boomerang, for example. It also does a nice job of pushing data out to some of the most common email marketing platforms like MailChimp. But I'm not a strong advocate of one over another.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing. I work with so many nonprofits asking what is the best tech, and it's not a one size fit all approach. So, it's making sure that you do your research on it and you're asking all the right questions. And, and it would be good to hear from you. Some of the questions that I always tell clients to like look into is like, can you grow with this tool? What is like the pricing, and making sure that there's no like hidden pricing or hidden fees. Do you like some tools? They add on a percentage or take off a percentage off the donation, or you have to pay an upfront annual cost. So what's important to you and your donor relationship? Where are they storing their data? I think is really important. So, every country kind of has their laws of where data is stored, different things like that. Is there any like questions that they should be asking tech companies? That's right.
I mean, I think, the budget question is an important one. Understanding like the ability of those tools to integrate with whatever you already have, which often is a website. So if you have your website built on Squarespace or on WordPress, or making sure that you understand how that tool is then going to plug into that. Often I really like for the tool to be embeddable, like right into your website, so that visitors don't have that experience of being kind of bounced out to an external donation page, however pretty it might be. But that embedding the tools into a website is often doesn't seem to be at the top of the feature list for a lot of these platforms. So money, the functionality is important, and also I think the staff, thinking about the match between the technical skills that your staff has currently and are they actually going to be able to manage that platform, or is it too technologically complicated for them? So you see sometimes organizations getting sucked in by the idea of like Salesforce licenses being free for nonprofits, and it's Salesforce is a super powerful platform, like it has its place, but it does not belong with a small startup nonprofit.
Right.
That would be my experience. I mean, there are a similar set of questions that I work through when I'm helping an organization think through like a website rebuild or replatforming potentially. Like, if the organization's growing and they feel like they're kind of pushing up against the limitations of what Squarespace can do, and they're thinking about whether we move, is it the right time to move to a more powerful WordPress website? We go through the same set of questions about budget and functional needs and staffing expertise and the ability to kind of maintain that website into the future. I think with the tech stack, it is not to kind of push the consultant thing, but it is a great opportunity to bring a consultant in the organization to help you with that vendor, figure out your requirements, and then help you with the vendor selection process. It's not something, I don't do that for like the giving tech stack, but I know that there are some great consultants out there who do that work, and it truly is a kind of a specific skill set that you want to consider leveraging when you're in that moment of trying to choose tools.
I agree. And the consultant too will help you, start small and scale from there, right? Because there's a lot out there that you have to take into consideration. And you don't have to have this huge tech stack in a couple of months. Like, it takes time. So being strategic of how you're building that out can really help make sure that you're going at a reasonable rate and you're taking, because there's a lot to consider. So I agree with you. But I would say it's definitely worth it. Automations can really help, especially sending out those email welcome series. I'm a huge fan of sending out email welcome series, after a new donor comes in, for example, or...
Well, it's such an important moment because, anybody that's making a donation, whether they're new or not, like they're in that moment of, they're super excited about your work. They're excited enough that they have come to your website and they've made a donation, which is, they've filled out a complicated form. They had to type in their credit card number. That's a moment when that person is probably as excited as they're ever going to be about your organization. And so don't just absolutely make sure they're getting some kind of email, and don't let it just be the automated email that the platform sends. Like, customize it. That is such an important communication moment. And so it hurts my heart when I make a donation to an organization that I feel passionate about, and then I get this kind of boilerplate email back, and they've missed an opportunity to really capture that moment.
I agree. Perfect time to show them behind the scenes, welcoming them to the community, sharing one really good impact story about your donation just did this to this person, this animal, this whatever your cause is, however it made an impact. It's the perfect opportunity to welcome into the community. Well, Ed, as we kind of wrap up, I would love to know, is there any final advice or tips for nonprofits just starting either the website design process or really just an important piece of website design in general that people should keep in mind, maybe even specifically international nonprofits?
Yeah. I mean, if you're just starting out, like, the website does not have to be complicated. There are a handful of things that you want to make sure it does, that it's secure, that you include that basic kind of information that establishes who your organization is and that you're trustworthy. I would encourage everybody to have an email list that they are getting people signed up for, because once people are on that email list, you own that audience. It's not like the social media where the algorithm can change and you lose your means of communicating with people overnight. So let's keep things simple. It doesn't have to be complicated when you're starting out.
Grow your email list. Thank you for sharing that. That's a big thing I also teach is, like you're saying, you don't own the data. We never know. Facebook could close tomorrow and, all those followers can be gone, but we have access to those emails. So build that email list, engage with them. I'm a huge fan of donor communication and engagement. There's some really cool opportunities there. So definitely build that email list. And then Ed, just out of curiosity, this is just a fun last parting question. If you could be anywhere in the world right now, where would you be?
Well, I just got back from visiting family in England at the end of last month, and I had a great time. I always miss England when I get back there, and so I would love to be back there for another week before we go into the busy fall season here in the US.
I love that. That's so fun. Ed and I were just talking before this, saying that we were both in the same exact area. I think around the same time. We might have missed each other by a week, but I think it's just so fun how small this world actually is that we quite literally could have crossed paths and not even known. So it's fun how that happens. Well, Ed, thank you so much for being here. Where can people find you online to connect?
Sure. So the website is bluehillsdigital.com, or you can just Google it. It'll pop right up. I am probably most active on LinkedIn, but I'm not a LinkedIn superstar like some people. And the newsletter that Morgan mentioned, I was encouraged, like you were just saying, build your email list. So if you want to hop on that email newsletter, there's a link at bluehillsdigital.com/newsletter, or it's called The Digital Landscape if you want to try Google on that one too. We'll put the links in the notes. Yeah,
we will. We'll link everything and do it. Sign up for the newsletter. A couple of us consultants were talking the other day about how great Ed's newsletter is because it just has so many great, clear next steps that are just tangible and just good for reminders too. Like even for me as a consultant, I'm like, I need to do that to even my website or my digital presence. So definitely sign up. Ed, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for the invite. Yeah.
Thanks so much.